Everyone, thank you very much for joining today. I'm Paul Campbell, I'm a director here at Babel PR, and I'll be moderating the panel discussion. I think a lot of you probably know Babel, but for those of you who don't, we are a B2B technology, PR and content marketing agency, and we have a very strong focus on the telecoms industry, and I actually head up a number of our telecoms accounts. But of course, you're not here to see me, and I'm here today with an esteemed panel of telecoms journalists. So we have Catherine Speglia, who's the technology editor for RCR Wireless. Hi, Catherine. Rayla Maestra, the editorial director at Telecom TV, and Keith Dyer, editor at the Mobile Network. So Catherine, Ray, Keith, it's great to have you here with me. So in today's session, we're going to be exploring what the panelists consider to be, I guess, the major telecoms trends that they're interested in covering next year. And we really hope that this will help inform your marketing and messaging strategies for next year. We will also be digging into their views on Mobile World Congress Barcelona and the best way for companies to generate the media's attention during the time of the show. Obviously, the Omicron COVID variant is making things a bit unpredictable at the moment, but really for the purpose of this session, I will be assuming that Mobile World Congress is going to go ahead as both a physical and virtual event as planned. We also want the audience to inform some of the discussion today, so we will be running a couple of anonymous polls through the session, so we'd really appreciate your input towards those as well. And then finally, at the end of the session, we'll be opening up to a Q&A. So if you've got any questions, if you wouldn't mind just please holding on to those till the end. Brilliant. So to kick things off, I guess, but before we look ahead to next year, it would be good to know from the panel if there were one or two trends that particularly interested you this year, any that maybe took you by surprise at all. So Ray, I'll start with you with that one.
Took me by surprise, I guess, the speed of the hyperscalers, the speed at which they moved into position, both as providers of services directly to customers, as well as engaging as partners with the telecom operators. I think the progress made there has maybe surprised quite a few in the industry. I think also the speed at which certain companies have moved in terms of embracing and pushing open network infrastructure. What hasn't surprised me has been the massive pushback from certain areas of the industry, either directly and bluntly or behind the scenes. You know, the smiling face with the assassin cloak, I think you could put it, particularly in terms of Open RAN. And I've also been surprised at the lack of progress made in terms of efforts on energy efficiency and greater sustainability of networks. A lot of talk, not enough action, I would say, or certainly not enough action and real world experience brought to bear to the market and with actual evidence. Plenty of talk, not enough action. So I would say that those are the main things I would pick out.
Thanks, Ray. Catherine, I'll hand over to you.
Sure. Well, Ray kind of got on a few that I was going to talk about, but, you know, related to to the first thing that you mentioned about how quickly the hyperscalers are kind of moving in here. I've been kind of following, you know, how telco operators are shifting their business models or attempting to shift their business models to better monetize 5G and MEC, to kind of keep up with that. You know, an example of this on the consumer side is gaming and other forms of entertainment, but they're also looking for ways to be more than just a connectivity provider for enterprises and find a way to offer more valuable services on top of that. Open RAN, as Ray mentioned, definitely continuing to grow, and we kind of expect more large-scale Open RAN deployments in 2022. And we've been starting to more seriously cover 6G and Wi-Fi 7 this year. We've been sort of ignoring pitches around 6G for a bit, kind of not thinking there was much substance, but we are starting to actually look into that and talk and have those conversations, which of course is interesting. So I'd say conversations around what's next for connectivity is already starting, even as those, latest generations are still kind of in early days.
Thanks, Catherine. And Keith.
Yeah, well, I feel like I should share my screen and show my working. I did write these down before, but I've written down, if I say a surprise makes me look like I don't know what's going on, please forgive me, but I've been surprised by the move to the public cloud, or at least the sort of potential and sort of philosophical discussions around that this year, how quickly that's kind of cascaded. I've probably written most about Open RAN. That's probably not a surprise, but I'd say it probably has been overweighted in terms of screen pixels against telco actual spending in that area. But I think we all understand why it's a story for us. It kind of knocks on into, geopolitics, digital agendas, security, even down into the sort of the chipset type manufacturers and what they're doing in response and trying to foster that. So I get that. One that maybe we haven't touched on is, I think, surprising, probably for me, private networks. I think, again, because there's a sort of a blend there of some new technology capabilities, which touches on the hyperscalers maybe, but also it's a kind of existential issue for telcos a little bit. They see an opportunity, but they know they've been pretty shocking at unlocking enterprise services, beyond devices, SIMs, airtime to this point. But how they get to that, I think, has been, quite a big story this year as well. Yeah,
absolutely. And we've seen probably the news in the last 48 hours that AWS is now encroaching into that private enterprise space as well with its own 5G solutions. So it'd be interesting to see how that puts pressure on the operators as we move into 2022. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for sharing your, I guess, main trends for 2021. So looking ahead to 2022 then. So one of the big, I guess, events in the industry calendar in early 2022 is Mobile World Congress. And I guess it's going to be a focal point for a lot of companies as they look to build their marketing campaigns for early next year. The event is always extremely popular, and it can be hard for companies to create messages that stand out from the crowd and align with what journalists want to hear about. So we'll dig a bit into that. But I guess before we get some insight from our panel, we'd actually love to hear from the audience about your plans for attending Mobile World Congress. So will you be attending with a big team, including senior management? So we know a lot can change between now and the event, but it'd be really good to get a gauge on what everyone's current plans are. So I'm going to quickly put up a poll here. And it'd be brilliant if everyone could respond. I'll give about a minute for everyone to do that. So like I said, yeah, the questions here, will you be attending this year, and what size team will you be bringing? And does that include senior management?
Tension is mounting.
Well, I'll give it another 5 seconds.
Is John Hoffman on this webinar? Because he's only allowed to vote once if he is.
Let's have a look. Can't see him, Ray. I can't see him.
I'm shocked.
Right, here we go. So the results show, interestingly, that 60% of respondents here said their company is attending, but with a relatively small team. And minimal senior management, which is interesting. So, perhaps companies are still skeptical about going to the show this year, and I guess probably won't be going in the same way as they were pre-pandemic. So, I think it'd be probably positive news to the ears of our panelists that companies are planning to go. What I will say is that a few weeks ago, Babel did a survey of telecoms journalists which revealed that the vast majority do plan on attending Mobile World Congress, including the journalists here today. And it actually also revealed that one of the things that journalists most value about going to Mobile World Congress is meeting with senior management and getting their views on the biggest industry trends. So maybe for the companies that are participating, it should be a consideration to bring some of your executives along to be able to offer them to journalists. As I'm sure our panel will agree, you do value speaking with that lenient level of management within these companies. Excellent. So let's dig into the panel's views about the show. So first of all, I've got a couple of questions for you, Keith, because I know that you actually attended Mobile World Congress this year.
Yeah, I did.
I think you're the only journalist on the panel that did. So how did you find the show this year? Did it give you confidence that the event can grow this year, next year, and be a success?
Yeah, I mean, look, I found the show was really great. I mean, there was, it was lovely being in a place with hardly anyone else there and moving around Barcelona, easily, and the event easily. I don't think, because it was so small in scope, that you could take too many lessons from the last event into the next one. I think there was a handful of thousands at the event. If anyone's not aware, there were 3 halls open. Hall 3, and that encompassed everything. So the conference was mainly in Hall 3. Hall 2 had some things in it. Hall 1 was half dedicated to testing facilities. So that's really how small it was. I think on the practical side, in terms of anyone thinking of attending, the health stuff, if you call it that, worked well. There's a slightly different regime this year, I think. So we all had to be sort of tested and proven tested through the GSMA's own system. I think this year they're saying upload proof of vaccination or upload proof of a negative test, and now someone presumably will check that out. The app worked really well. If anyone's thinking about that, the GSMA app that goes green if you're kind of good status and get you in, all touchless, that all worked really well. So confidence in the fact that, yeah, they know what they're doing. I think they're going to be able to handle the numbers of people going in, especially as they're not going to have the testing regime in the hall, which could have been a choke point. Tiny practical thing, you need a specific mask. They were pretty strong on that. I suspect they will be going forward. Probably not one to just try and get around. So hard to say that, yeah, because they can run an event successfully for 5,000, it'll work. I think John Hoffman, the GSMA CEO, was talking about 60,000 or something. I don't know. I don't think you can extrapolate. So I would say one thing, though, that I said this on the GSMA panel as well. I think the pause gives the GSMA time to maybe take advantage of the hiatus and try and emphasize a bit of quality over quantity and numbers. And maybe that's possibly incumbent on us not to sort of hammer them if the numbers are down and go, aha, there's they've only got 20,000 or whatever. But I think that being at the event and being able to have sort of productive meetings with a bit of space, figuratively and really and literally to move around and breathe, as it were, was really good. And I think, if you think about the number of unproductive meetings that must go on at that event, maybe companies don't have to prioritize those, and we can just, turn down the scale a bit, still have a good event.
Brilliant. Thanks, Keith. Next question's for you, Ray. I know that you reported on MWC Barcelona from home this year, probably the first time in a long time. How did you find that? Was it easy for you to get the stories and insights you required?
Well, I've said for years that the easiest way to know what's going on at MWC is not to go, because that's the only way that you get the helicopter view, the big picture. And you can see the gazillion announcements that are being made by companies, and this is why I think that for companies with an MWC PR and marketing strategy, I think the ones that have always been or tended to be more successful are the ones that even if they have 15 or 20 announcements, are the ones that drip feed it in the lead up to MWC. And this makes a lot of sense to me, because then people attending the show, I'm not sure how many people go and visit a company to find out what they've announced. I think they go to talk to them about what they already know they're doing, and they want to find out more. And I think that, last year was very unusual because it was such a nightmare for everybody to change their plans and their processes. And I think we all know companies plan these things quite a long time in advance. But I think that, bringing out the big angles and the big stories ahead of the actual physical show itself, maybe keeping a one or two zingers for the actual days of the show itself, that to me makes sense. And then that makes it easier to pick up the trends and to be able to, get the news trajectory, if you like, for that show. We didn't see so much of that last year, but not being at the show, and I think with a lot of other companies not being at the show, they were making their announcements remotely as well. It wasn't too difficult to pick things up and be able to pick out, a few highlights each day to focus on. So my hope is that more companies will use late January and the month of February to line up what they are going to be presenting and talking about at MWC, so that those visiting can know where to go and what to go and talk about to companies, rather than scrambling in the dark.
And that's a really good point, Ray. Would your advice therefore be that, certainly for smaller companies, they should consider making their announcements before the show
Yes.
to generate that visibility, because of course the show itself is so busy, and then you can...
Yeah, totally, absolutely, because otherwise, the big companies do always hold on to stuff, even if they announce stuff in advance. If you announce something on the Monday at MWC and you're a small company, you are getting lost in the noise. Even the big companies get lost in the noise. I remember about 8 years ago, Ericsson announced an acquisition on day one of Mobile World Congress that nobody reported on because nobody spotted it. It was number 18 out of 26 press releases from Ericsson that day. It was kind of crazy. So I would say definitely, if you're a small company, get out there early. You'll get some visibility, generate some interest. I think it's the only way to go.
Yeah, some great advice. Thanks, Ray. And Catherine, so I understand that Mobile World Congress 22 will be your first Mobile World Congress. So I know you've probably been reporting on it for a few years. And how do you find, being based in the US, do you find that you managed to get your hands on those big stories coming out of the show in the past? How has that been for you?
Yeah. Well, I actually did go to Spain in 2020, even though the show was canceled. So I was there. I filmed some news stuff outside of the hall, and had a few in-person meetings. So that was a very odd year for me, but I didn't really go to the conference because no one can. I agree with Ray about, in the US, it's the same process, which is it is just easier for me to hear about things and to make sure I cover those things if it's coming out prior to the week of that event, because that week is chaos, even if you're not actually there at the show. If you're there at the show, of course, it's overwhelming and you are going to just gravitate towards the bigger companies because they have the bigger news, and it's like it's a sure thing that it's going to be a good story. But even, when you're doing it remotely, it's a lot of emails, a lot of phone calls. So if you trickle that stuff in, and I can start working on it. So even if it's embargoed, and I have to hold on to it, but if I'm already able to get that kind of worked on and filed away, then it's a guarantee that it's gonna go be reported on. So I definitely agree with Ray there. I'm looking forward to going. I did not go this past year. My editor went, and I feel like he got most of the attention regarding pre-briefings because he was there. So I think I had a harder time covering the news this past year than I even did in 2020, despite the cancellation. So looking forward to being the one there that actually gets all the attention.
Indeed. And so why have you decided to attend this year? Is it just yourself going from RCR?
I miss traveling, both personally and for work. And virtual session or virtual events have their place. But, we all have that burnout, and it's very easy to get distracted from sessions when your email's pinging. So I'm looking forward to being in a session, being at a keynote, and that being the only thing I'm really focusing on. My company, we have always worked remote. They live all over the world. It's one of the only times we get to see each other. So that's another reason I want to make sure I can go. Yeah, a few reasons.
Well, thanks, Catherine. So the next thing I want to explore are the issues and the trends that our panel are most interested in covering at Mobile World Congress. But actually, before I do that, I'd like to run another quick poll, actually on the topics and technology that the audience will be focusing their messaging on for the show. Unfortunately, the way that these Zoom polls work, I could only run 10 options on the poll. So I expect there might be a few issues you were planning on focusing on that won't be on the list, but we've got an other option if it's not on there. But we should broadly cover off most of the issues. And I want to run this and just to see, whether these topics kind of align with what our journalists want to be focusing on. So I'll reveal the poll after we've kind of picked up the insights of the audience. So if you bear with me, I can bring up the next poll. There we go. So please feel free to select multiple options here.
Anyone that takes 6G needs to send me an email afterwards as to why that is. Explain yourselves.
That's what I was saying.
But I'm not trying to influence anyone.
Right, we'll give it another 10 seconds.
Oh, I hope that encourages people to vote for 6G.
It probably will. Get a whole press release out of that.
Right, whilst that's running in the background, I'm going to ask the panel about the topics that they want to focus on at the show. So starting with yourself, Keith, what topics and trends are you most interested in hearing about next year?
I'll try not to sort of repeat where we've been so far. If I'm going to say Open RAN, vendor vRAN, I'm going to get into new products in this area, cool things around disaggregated, maybe small cells, look at the chip companies. We've got the likes of Marvel, NVIDIA, Xilinx, there's a couple of new ones, EdgeQ, see what they're doing in that. So really get into the guts of that. Cloud Core, move to 5G standalone, and the point of that being, what are operators actually doing with that? What services are emerging? What happened to slicing? Those kind of discussions. We hear a lot about 5G SA, we kind of pick up on it in DMN that it always gets described as being, unlocking the full potential of 5G. So there's another sort of bit to go into there as to what that actually means. Just quickly, my last one, it's kind of in my area, but the kind of automation and orchestration of networks, network management, that'll be something that I'll be looking to get picked up on. And that loops back a bit to O-RAN because of the potential for sort of more, what should I say, AI intelligence in the RAN part of it as part of that O-RAN model. So those are my three there.
Brilliant. Thanks, Keith. Catherine, on to you.
Yeah, my top one was standalone 5G also, because like Keith said, it's I've actually been a little surprised at how little I've heard about it this past year. I didn't include it in my 2021 trends because while it's obviously talked about, I would expect that to be more kind of center stage than it has been. So at Mobile World Congress, I definitely want to have more conversations around, the transition to kind of a 5G standalone core, to, be more specific and maybe not talk about what everyone else is looking forward to. I just finished a report on Wi-Fi 6 and 6E. And while that's not really a mobile technology, I know there'll be a lot of talk there around it. I'm particularly interested in how Wi-Fi will fit in now that 6 is here, especially when we're talking about compared to 5G, maybe in the enterprise space, and how those will kind of coexist. And I think because it's an international show, 6E will be an interesting conversation because, everyone around the world is kind of opening up that spectrum at a different pace, with some like China possibly not doing so at all. And, definitely cloud, maybe particularly around gaming. I'm personally a gamer, and I've been kind of following how telcos are trying and maybe not so much succeeding yet in tapping into that kind of booming 5G gaming market.
Great. And yourself, Ray?
Well, I would say to Catherine, don't apologize for being focused on something like Wi-Fi 6, because that's just as critical as anything. I mean, the show is called MWC, or Mobile World Congress, but really it's the annual telecoms congress, and all of these things are important to the bigger picture. If it was just about mobile, I think it would be a much smaller show, and the worse off for it. So I think, you know, for myself, and this probably comes a little bit from the years I spent at Light Reading, one of the areas I will focus on and tend to focus on in general is the importance, investment and developments in the accompanying data transport infrastructure. So the importance of fiber to the premises and optical transport technologies, any haul as well, going further back into the network. These are all absolutely critical. Otherwise, the mobile access, the radio access network is really kind of just an island, and you get massive bottlenecks. In terms of Open RAN, it's the RAN intelligent controller, the RIC, that I think is where I'll be sort of focusing some attention on. I am desperate to find somebody called Rick who's working on RIC. That's what I really want to find. I want a picture with Rick who's working on RIC. That for me is my main goal for Barcelona. And then I guess finally, sort of, you know, picking out some of the more dweeby elements in the weeds that are absolutely critical. Things like time synchronization. This is, you know, pretty absolutely critical, especially with a distributed network, to have synchronization technology embedded in a distributed network is going to be pretty critical for so many services that are being talked about as potential money makers in 5G and beyond into 6G. Now mentioned 6G as well. So those would be some of the areas, as well as of course some of the fiercest gossip that anybody can get their hands on. That's the main focus, of course.
Yeah, never forget, journalists love gossip. Well, yeah, thanks everyone. I will now share the results of the topics that our audience are going to be focusing on. I hope everyone can see that. So no surprises there, really, that 5G is at the top. We didn't get anyone talking about 6G yet, Catherine, but
Boo.
I'm sure we will, and we'll make sure those get in front of you. And again, you know, not a lot. And not a lot of surprises elsewhere, really, but, you know, cloud infrastructure, which I guess does incorporate edge computing, is very high. And also really good to see that sustainability is on the agenda for a lot of companies, and should really be on the agenda for every company, really, as we move into Mobile World Congress. And we'll touch on that in a bit more detail in a bit. I think, you know, the takeaway for everyone here really is that, as well as thinking about your own agenda for the show, it is really important to also have consideration about the topics that journalists are covering as well, and align your messaging with what the media are focusing on, because that will help you generate coverage around the time of the event. And talking about generating coverage, so I guess the next question I want to ask the panel is what advice, sorry, I'll take this poll away now. What advice would you give to companies to help ensure that they are getting their news in front of you, I guess ahead of the event and during the event at the show? So Keith, I don't know if you want to kick off with that one.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I just seen that the natural light I was relying on has gone behind me, so I'm now looming out of some darkened cell. I assure you everything's okay. There's no power cut. Look, why do I take meetings? It's a bit, I don't want to say it's surprisingly random, because it's not random, but there are different reasons for taking meetings, right? So, or briefings, or how to get in front of me. New things are good, actual new products, new software, an important partnership if it's revealing about why you've made that partnership. That's news, that's the stuff we're trying to follow. not going to repeat what Ray and Catherine said about, you know, the early heads up, but definitely that's one. Opinion matters if it has some backing and experience. So I guess you'd be saying, whether it's opinion or information or knowledge about what's actually going on somewhere, right? You say we love gossip, but what we're really looking for is the actual of what's happening. So yeah, we can go and read a press release on any one of a dozen sites, but tell me what's actually happening within the operators that you know of that are working with this. Is it working? Are they getting the returns they expect to see? Those kinds of conversations will be of interest for me. And I take a few meetings sort of just to check the pulse a bit. I mean, I think that, you know, we're all busy and, you know, maybe it's a luxury, but as much as I can, sometimes it's worth just checking in on a few people. Those kind of slightly more ad hoc conversations. I don't know how, from a PR point of view, you'd structure that really, but, you know, I guess that falls under the sort of interesting conversation area. But those are the things. There's the kind of the hard news, there's the behind it, and there's a slightly less structured, you know, if we've got time just to kick something around for 20 minutes.
That usually comes with alcohol, Keith, doesn't it?
Sadly, yeah. Why does it have to come with alcohol? But
no, it doesn't have to.
Coffee can do it too.
Can't help.
Yeah.
I mean, can't not help.
Yeah.
But I mean, what time of day it is.
There's nothing startling there, is there? But you know, we give us something more than the actual, more than than what you're punting out on the wires, I guess, and tell us why it's important.
Right, and Catherine, what advice can you give to companies that want to get meetings with you and I guess generate coverage at the show?
Yeah, hard to add too much to that because I think it was like pretty spot on. I mean, if you think about it this way, if all you're offering me is an announcement of a partnership or announcement of a new product, that exact news can be found anywhere by any other publication. So there's really no guarantee in that a reader is going to choose to read that with RCR. So if that news comes alongside, a commentary on what went into making that partnership, what the motivation was, how this partnership will impact the industry as a whole, that's something exclusive. That's something that's going to make this worth reading on RCR over other things. So similar with like product, we will cover product announcements, but we don't want to do it in a sales pitch way, right? We want to be able to have a conversation with why is this product important? How does it change the landscape for, whatever technology category that product is in. So yeah, I think definitely, and of course, like strong opinions, again, when based in expertise and true knowledge, they make good headlines, they make interesting stories. So yeah, I would say, offer up some type of executive or, just industry insight along with the news.
Brilliant advice. Thanks, Catherine. And Ray?
I think the only things I would add to that, reiterate that, a decision maker, somebody who, when they say something, it means something to their customers, their partners, their staff, their investors, or their backers, so a big hitter as the person who's saying something. And this might sound very boring and old hat and going over old ground, but I can't stress enough how important it is for any pitch to be clear, concise, and short. I'm sure that every day I pass over any number of, particularly in email, pitches that in the first 100 words are just telling me, company X, which is the greatest company in this sector and has a history. I couldn't give a damn. What is it you want to tell me? Why do you want to tell me? And why is it important? 3 bullet points right at the top to capture the attention and put it in just good old plain English, because I've been reporting on this sector for 25 years, but I'm not a technologist. I respond to the same things as everybody else. Just clear, concise pictures. Tell me how you're going to make some money.
Great advice. Thanks, Ray. So how important is it for companies to get embargoed content across to you, perhaps the week before the show, so that you can line stuff up during the show? Do you do a lot of that? Or is most of it, the stuff that you'll be covering at the show, is it content that you receive whilst you're actually out there? How does that work? I don't know if any of you have got a burning passion to answer this question.
I'll just come in first and say 1 week is not long enough. Start mid-January, and if you're going to announce something in advance or offer an embargo, and I mean offer an embargo as in strike a bilateral agreement, not unilaterally try to impose an embargo, which is nonsensical and is an oxymoron. Get it out there between mid-January and mid-February, because I'm sure it's the case for everybody else. Once I get onto the show floor at Barcelona, my time is already going to be booked up and taken up. I'm not going to be standing around looking at my incoming email, to see what has been announced. That's more likely to be the thing I would catch up at 9 o'clock in the evening after a couple of cervezas. So, get it in early and get it in weeks before the event.
Good advice. Anything to add there, Keith or Catherine?
Yeah, I'd just say that maybe, I'm sure everyone on the call is aware, but several companies now actually hold structured briefings, what we're going to tell you at World Congress, maybe in late January, something like that. Get a bunch of journalists together, like embargo stuff, and maybe run through, sometimes as many as 10 things they're going to say. It's annoying when they then save the big one for the Monday morning, and you've got everything written up, and then they go and say something completely different. But there's a lot of that goes on, and if you're not doing it, you definitely should.
Yeah, nothing to add. That I agree completely.
Great. Well, I want to leave plenty of time for audience Q&A, so I think we'll move on from Mobile World Congress. So I guess just looking generally at 2022, I know you have provided a lot of advice already to the audience, but are there any other ways that you would suggest that companies try and catch your attention with news and thought leadership pitches throughout the year in general? What can companies do to stand out from the crowd? And I know, Ray, you said short and sweet pitches. It is, I think, it's generally a very good rule. Is there any other ways really that you advise companies to what they should be doing to get your attention next year? So Catherine, I can start with you if that's okay.
Yeah, I think this is always a weirdly hard question for me to answer, because it's something I do every day, which is decide which stories to cover, but it's still hard for me, kind of like Keith mentioned, to figure out why I pick what I pick. I do think you certainly don't want something too long and too pitchy, which is odd. But I want to believe that what you're telling me is important. I don't want you to convince me. I don't want to feel like I'm being convinced. So I think that's what Ray kind of meant about don't tell me this is the leader in this and this is the leader in that. And we talked a lot about embargoed news, but we didn't necessarily talk about the fact that if the word embargo is in the subject line, like I am absolutely going to open that email, just because to me that is an opportunity that other things are not offering me. So I'm definitely going to take a look at that. I also think that when a pitch is sent to me, when it's using my name as opposed to a general email, I am more likely to look at it because my assumption is that whoever sent this email to me knows my coverage and knows that this is relevant to me. Not that this was just something that was sent to a bunch of journalists who are because I get emails for like all sorts of tech that have nothing to do with what I cover. But if it's, if they use my name, I'm like, okay, well, that's at least one step closer to knowing who I am. If they reference something else I've written, that also helps. It means they've done their research, and I'm more likely to want to engage with them and figure out why they think they should talk to me. So those are kind of my small things.
I'm shocked to hear that people don't address you in the emails, Catherine.
Sometimes they call me sir.
You wouldn't get that from Babel.
Sometimes I get like, dear sir, and I'm like, well, I'm deleting that. So.
Wow. Dear me. How about you, Keith?
Yeah, I'm scanning the inbox. I'm seeing the subject line in the preview pane. You know, I'm not even a hard news guy anymore, but I can absolutely, well, anymore if I ever was, but I can tell you that, you know, when I had several stories to write a day, that's what people are doing. And so the best ones are telling me why the product or the initiative or the partnership, whatever it is going to have a material impact on maybe the vendor landscape, on a telco's top line or bottom line, how it's going to impact the development, for me, operation of networks. Tell me that straight up. Tell me why it's important, in other words, to everyone else, not why it's important to your company. And I don't want to get too negative, but if you know, no's for me are things like more surveys, you know, industry says this, or opinion that says industry leaders need to be aware of this, or we're falling behind on that, or we're missing out, you know, don't care. Clearly just structured to try and point me towards some angle that you're trying to push. But yeah, no, that's it. I'm rabbiting on and I'm saying to keep it short, but I mean, keep it short and tell me why it's of interest to everyone else. Yeah.
Brilliant, thanks, Keith. Ray, anything to add?
Well, it's fair. Journalists aren't very good at following their own advice. I think that's
it feels chaotic when I
yeah, no, not a lot to add on what's been said before. I think, you know, keep it focused. I would say the other thing that is more likely to capture my attention and interest is where things are not anonymous and there's more than one party involved. You know, so vendor A wins a big deal with a tier 1 operator. I really couldn't give a damn. But, you know, a $50 million deal with a named operator, and here's the, you know, and you can talk to the operator and us to find out why this is so important. Yes, I'm interested in that. Or like Keith said, you know, the group presentations. I think, you know, as far as I know, or certainly the people I know are quite happy to be involved in the group presentations, you know, where there's multiple, you know, journalists and even sometimes analysts on the same call or in the same room. You know, the discussion is broader and wider, and I think those can really work. But I think bringing together the trinity of an independent analyst, a customer, and a supplier, I think bringing those three angles together, I think, you know, helps to provide a better, a fuller picture, if you like.
Brilliant, thanks, Ray. Right, last question, and I know this is the chance for the panel to give a bit of a plug. Is there anything that you think the audience will be interested to know about what your publication will be offering in 2022? Keith, with that face, I'll start with you.
All right, yeah, no, of course they're going to be interested in what we're doing. So we've got a what are we doing that people might not know about? We've got a series of market reports coming up, probably sort of one a month, that kind of frequency, where we'll get in depth into topics, probably the sort of things we've discussed here. And you know, they're editorially led, they're not, you know, sponsored white papers or those kind of things. So we'll be putting those out on a, you know, to a schedule, as it were, on topics. I should say we produce a fantastic quarterly magazine, you know, digital and in print. That's a wonderful thing to do. You can sign up for that. We do a very useful weekly newsletter, which is kind of everything you've read through the week and forgotten about, but it seems to go over really well, and sort of short, punchy bits of news from the week. And we've got, you know, we usually have a sort of interesting cast of industry executives. We try and look outside of the, I guess, the sort of standard faces. We've got a bit of scope to not just follow the same few companies. So, you know, get in touch with us around that. We're always really interested to speak to new companies and new faces.
Thanks, Keith. And Ray?
Well, Telecom TV is going to be doing more of what it says on the tin. We're going to be doing a lot more video. Hopefully we'll be doing, you know, TV interviews in person and in situ rather than virtually, but we'll definitely be doing both. So we have a series of summits lined up for 2022 already, as well as plans to, you know, if Barcelona goes ahead and we're allowed to be there on the ground, I will be there on the ground. We'll definitely be doing a mixture of studio and Barcelona-based programming, and telecom TV will be growing in 2022 in many different ways. And I would say watch this space.
Exciting. Catherine.
Yeah, so RCR is getting much more involved in events. We started with the Open RAN Forum, I believe, last year. Then this year we had the Open RAN Forum, and we added a 5G manufacturing forum and private networks forum. But next year, those three will be back. But we have like a whole lineup of events, women in telco, a mobile edge event, and some others. So definitely be on the lookout for those. Those are like single day virtual events with a bunch of sessions. Those have been really exciting and successful. We're also focusing a lot more on telco cloud moving forward. We hired an editor who that's kind of going to be his beat. So we're really focusing on building up our editorial coverage around kind of all things cloud.
Fantastic. Well, excellent. Well, thank you, Catherine, Keith, and Ray. I'm now going to open up the questions to our audience. So if anyone has a question for our panel, please type it into the Q&A box, which I hope is at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and type that in, and then I'll put that question forward to the audience. So please type ahead if you've got any questions.
And I'm happy to take any questions on the topic of coffee. I think Jamie is desperate to put one in.
No, I do not. My husband is a saxophone player. That is not the first time I've gotten that question while doing events. I'm not that cool, no.
Any other questions? Any other questions for our panel?
See, when I attend events, this is when the people on the panel normally go, "We've done such a good job that no one's got any questions," and everyone chortles whilst feeling secretly cut down inside. So,
you said nothing interesting.
Yeah, we've said nothing provoking whatsoever. Either that or fully comprehensive.
Oh, there's one.
Yeah.
Right. A very important question's just popped up. What's wrong with Ray's FPL team this year? And that was from an anonymous attendee, Ray. So have you got any idea who that is?
Wait, there's a real question
here. Anwar Khan has asked a pretty good question.
Yeah. Ronaldo.
In the chat.
In the chat, actually.
In the chat,
oh, right. Yeah, got it. Yes. So any advice for small companies that want visibility from the larger companies at MWC, customers and suppliers? Who wants to take that first?
Well, I think, Ray, didn't you sort of address that earlier on about embargoed content and getting the news, not necessarily embargoed, but getting it out there earlier?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the key. I think that is the key play, is to not get lost in the noise. I think, like you mentioned, Catherine, once people are at the show, they do tend to gravitate towards the bigger companies. That's where they know other people will be, where there's guaranteed, you know, sort of action, as it were, whether it's, you know, and it doesn't matter what part of the industry you come from there. So I would say do not hold on to anything you're talking about for Barcelona week. Get it out early, get it in front of people, and use multiple, you know, different routes. You know, I would say, you know, social media, I think in the past year, or I think probably in the past, during the pandemic, I would say, LinkedIn has really come into its own in terms of being a channel for better dissemination and easier and broader dissemination of information. It's not the one and only channel, obviously, but I think that's a pretty good route to take, as well as using the sort of more regulated and professional channels as well. But definitely get out there early. That's number one. That's above anything else, I would say.
I guess Keith and Catherine, how do you feel about, you know, companies and approaching you on LinkedIn and other social channels?
Well, it's all good. I'll just answer this one for Anwar. Just a couple of things I thought about really was one is, you know, I interviewed a company the other day that's 20 people. And I think if you're a small company, you have to say why what you're doing is or will, when you scale, fill a gap in the industry. So he says, how do we get visibility in front of those larger companies? You have to explain to them why you are doing something they cannot, you know, currently fulfill, you know, from a customer point of view. But secondly, don't underestimate your own value of interest. I think everyone wants to know who the cool companies coming are, you know, coming up are, you know, who are the startups, who are the interested new companies. You've got that as a small company. You've got the ability to say, right, we're the guys, you know, punching hard here and trying to make things happen, and we're bringing the innovation and we're bringing news to the industry. You know, pump that angle if you can back it up, and don't underestimate, you know, your value to the likes of us by doing that.
Great point, definitely.
And you know, LinkedIn, yeah, sure, it's been very good.
Yeah, no, some of my favorite conversations have been with smaller companies who are focusing on something very specific and solving a very specific problem, but in a very innovative and creative way. And then, you know, I have those conversations and then I see them gaining traction with, you know, Verizon and other tier 1 operators. So yeah, I agree that they are absolutely valuable. They are a joy to talk to. Sometimes the conversations are much more interesting because they are more candid. They don't have this whole wall of messaging like the big companies that they've built up over the years. And they're really willing to talk about some of the very real challenges. And they're not just saying like, no, 5G is great, it's gonna solve everything. Like they really, you know, will talk about things. So I love talking to smaller companies. Reaching out on social media. I'm not great with social media. I think I have like a built-in distrust for it. So I'm trying to get better. So when people message me on LinkedIn, I usually just ask them to like email me. I try to get it quickly off of social media for some reason. But it's definitely a great way it's great for visibility. And I do think it facilitates the initial contact.
No. Shirley, I saw you put your hand up. I will unmute you if you still want to ask a question. I know you put your hand back down. Yeah, Shirley, you've got the floor if you'd like to ask a question.
Well, I didn't actually. I think I was trying to push a different button and not raise a hand. But I am enjoying the conversation. That's okay. But I'm curious as to whether they think it's a good idea for companies to collect up together. I mean, do they find it better to talk to companies separately, or is it a good idea to try to, you know, join up and do shared activities? Does it get more impact that way?
Question. Ray, do you want to tackle that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think where there's a clear and natural bond between companies. I mean, if you have a group of companies who are partners or who are in a proof of concept together or a trial, then I think, you know, bringing those companies together to talk to the media and analysts as a group, I think that that is more attractive and makes more sense. I think that's more likely to get traction. I think that kind of thing is a good idea. Yeah.
Catherine?
Yeah, I agree. I also think, kind of piggybacking off of the previous question, if you are a smaller company, but you're doing work with a larger company, that's also a good opportunity to kind of say, hey, here's an opportunity to talk to someone from our company about what we're doing, but we can loop in someone from this company that you're probably more familiar with, and, you know, kind of include that in the offer. And I think that does a few things, but it certainly increases the chances of me wanting to have that conversation.
Right. Anything to add there, Keith?
No, not to that, I don't think. Yeah.
Right, we just got a question from Jamie. So at events like Mobile World Congress, how much interest do you have in demos? Or would you rather talk to an exec with an interesting opinion or perspective?
Great question. I'd written demos down as something that I tend to do. I enjoy that aspect of it. I will quite often go and do demos, and I'm really happy to have the subject matter expert do that as well. Let them speak. Quite often the person in your company that has the most experience of how what they're demonstrating helps the customer is that product manager or the product designer, product marketer perhaps. So yeah, Jamie, I personally have quite a lot of interest in demos. I think it's, that's the whole point of those kind of face-to-face shows for me, a little bit something you can't actually do so well online.
And Catherine, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I agree. I think for me, it depends on what the demo is. Like I've had to do some weird virtual reality stuff, like in front of a room full of people. And I'm like, I don't want to be doing this, but yes, in general, I agree with Keith that, that is one of the reasons you go to these events in person, is to see some of this stuff in action, because especially when it's really technical, it can be really hard to understand like what is really happening when you're just explaining it to me. So it's cool to see it in like a real world environment.
Great. Ray?
I would say I'd be more cool, as in less interested in demos, only because I think a demo at a trade show, unless it is somebody demonstrating, well, here's the kind of, the 5G, specific 5G application connection we can get from Barcelona to somebody else on the other side of the world, or that real world demo, then I think it's not really showing me or telling me a great amount. And also because I'm not a technologist, I guess I maybe shy away a bit from that, but it's less of a thing for me, but it is very, very dependent.
Yeah, I guess it depends what the demo is like. I mean, I remember seeing one, it was a tip thing, a disaggregated cell site gateway or something, which kind of meant nothing to me beyond conceptually at that point. And I saw literally on a booth with a bunch of servers, labeled up, and the connections showing, and there's a radio over here or something.
The lights were flashing.
Yeah, exactly. The lights are on, it must be working. But just something that sort of makes the conceptual real, I guess.
Yeah.
I guess that's what I meant by a demo. Yeah.
Okay. We just have a couple more questions that have come in. I know we're at time. Catherine, Ray, Keith, have you got a few more minutes that you can spare to answer 2 more questions?
Sure.
I'll give you a couple, but my captors are coming for me soon in this cell. So
no problem at all. We've got a question from Alistair McCormick, who says, do you think the industry is adopting openness, or is it too easy to go with one vendor? Does anyone want to jump into that one?
No.
Keith?
Isn't it both? I mean, that's the easy answer, isn't it? Alistair, what a hard
question. I think we need another hour for that one.
Yeah, I think it's quite an open question, if you like.
Yeah. Set up a big briefing, Alistair.
Yeah. What does HP think? I think that I mean, they're certainly talking about it. What can you say? There's
I don't know
who is saying they're not. I mean, at this point,
I don't know what they all say they are. I don't know what that means.
And finally, a question from Michael. How interested are you in the keynote speeches at MWC? Are they something you tend to cover?
I do. I like keynote speeches. I for a number of reasons, they're like easy because they're on my schedule. I know when they're scheduled, so I go there. And I don't know, they make good stories. I think it feels almost like the backbone of the event. If you go to the keynotes, you kind of have maybe like oversight of some of the bigger trends. So I like keynotes.
Ray?
I don't go at all.
You don't?
No.
Interesting. And Keith, how do you feel about the keynotes?
It's just a whole other world for me. That's not my show. It's a valuable part of the show, but it's not my part of the show.
Understood. Brilliant. Well, that's brought us to the end of the questions. So thank you everyone for your excellent questions. And thank you especially to Catherine, Keith and Ray for a really interesting discussion. You know, incredibly valuable and some great insights there. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks
Cheers, Paul. Thanks for doing it, Paul.
Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.